So I am about to turn 35. And honestly, getting to this age, I am so much more comfortable with who I am because not only do I have more life experience, but I have found out that I am neurodivergent. And also, kind of related, I am hypermobile. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And each of those things makes so much sense for me looking back to when I was younger, because I definitely not only moved differently, I learned differently, I thought and I felt differently. It put it so much more into perspective. And I feel like had I known that when I was younger, I probably would have appreciated my differences and my strengths and my abilities. But, I found this out just a couple years ago, like in my early 30s, and now it's really coming together and I'm starting to understand how to, be a really to be a thriving neurodivergent adult. Welcome back to my podcast. My name is Arielle, and this is Feeling My Feelings, where I finally feel my feelings after years of dissociating from them. And in this episode, I want to talk all about how I basically learned that I was neurodivergent only a couple years ago. I am turning 35 soon, and so I want to talk all about how I deal with neurodivergence in adulthood. And honestly, how I'm kind of using my neurodivergence, understanding it as more of a strength towards all of my creative endeavors. So let's get into it. I'll just say up front, it is not better or worse to be neurotypical or neurodivergent. I also want to say we're finding out more and more that there are actually many people that are neurodivergent. And maybe there were a lot of people who were more obviously ADHD, more obviously autistic, but some of us were somewhere on the spectrum. And if you're like me, it might have been easier for you to mask your neurodivergence. However, that still probably, overwhelmed you, burnt you out. It was probably a lot to try to put on a mask and pretend that you are neurotypical. So for me, I finally started to let go of my mask and kind of even out my neurodivergent, as well as picking up the sort of consistency and neurotypical traits. So first of all, forgive yourself for maybe starting things or becoming who you want to be later in life. I know for me, again, I am 35 and I'm just now starting to really understand what my strengths are, and I'm starting to put it into practice. And I feel like I could spend more time, I think for many years, I had gotten depressed every year on my birthday, starting from my late 20s to just about 30, I was always depressed about getting older. And it was because I knew that I was somebody with so many ideas, with so much passion, but somehow I was always getting too burnt out to achieve those things, or honestly too depressed, or honestly, I always felt like I was having trouble communicating and working with other people. And so once I started understanding oh, I just have a different way of doing things, I realized that I could just channel my strengths differently. And it didn't mean that I was dumb. I think for a lot of us, we struggle because obviously, even down to when we started in school, schooling was not as set up for us. If you are honestly, even kids now, we're still trying to figure out who the neurodivergent kids and who the neurotypical kids are. But it seems like people are more inclusive of different neurotypes. And it feels like, when we were younger, we likely didn't want to show any signs of being ADHD. We didn't want to be in a different sort of class. We were taught, just be good at things, just book learn the same way that all the other kids should know how to do. We had the idea that we're supposed to learn by memorizing key terms and understanding things a lot of the times out of context, where in reality, if you're neurodivergent, I mean, for me, I can't speak for everybody. For me, I leaned like my strengths were more big picture. So it was much better for me to learn kind of like the big picture of things and then funnel down into sort of the key details of things. And I think that might work for a lot of us who identify as neurodivergent. Some of us may learn just in different creative ways, maybe more visually, um, like whatever it is, you might just learn in your own unique way. Like you might do that better just because our brains are just a little bit different. And neurotypical people tend to learn things in a more focused and consistent way. Like they can probably compartmentalize, they can organize their mind in more of a sort of, I don't want to say disciplined because we can be disciplined, but in a more consistent, focused way that does not err towards diverting. But for us, it actually makes us more inclined to be more creative. It's interesting because the first signs that I was neurodivergent came up when I was very young. So I actually started taking piano lessons when I was about 4 years old. My older sister was already taking lessons. So I was like kind of taking lessons, learning here and there, but I seemed to take to it right away. And some people who have some form of autism kind of have this where they sort of have a natural ability, sometimes creative ability or strength or talent in something. So for me, with the piano, it was very peculiar because I also hated lessons. I hated practicing. And you know how you practice most things, you learn the key terms, you learn how to practice, you do little bits of it consistently over time, and you build the skill. My neurodivergent self did not have the patience for that. And at first, like I remember my piano teacher and my mom always telling me like you have to be patient. Like I was always frustrated when I was practicing. And now that I look at it, I think I was always frustrated because even at a young age, my brain wanted to see everything at once, and it didn't like learning little bits of information at a time without a bigger connected context. So what ended up happening was I think I was not patient enough to practice in little bits of time. So I ended up not practicing. I kind of procrastinated. And then like a day or two before my next lesson or a day or two before a recital or a competition, I would really hyper focus and I would practice all in one block. And part of that is perfectionism, like perfectionistic procrastination. But as like someone at a young age doing that, that is really interesting for me to like cram everything at like under 10 years old. And in order to do that, you have to be somebody who can take in a bunch of information at once and make it make sense and connect it all at once. And so that tells me right there that the way that I wanted to practice was not only like I wanted to see it all at once, I wanted to hyper focus, but I wanted to understand it just my way. And I didn't want to stop and go and practice it in little bits of time. That did not make sense to me. So this would continue happening for like basically the whole time that I was taking piano lessons. It got really bright. Anyway, so I will say that there's another piece to this in terms of me being a kid that really took to the piano without really practicing the way that people typically practice. So that is, first of all, being a kid, you are generally more open and you are more in tune with your feelings. Being a neurodivergent kid, you are definitely more open to connecting those feelings to what you're learning and honing in on and basically not questioning or having to overlearn things. Like for me, I think a lot of it, a lot of the frustration in learning piano was like, I almost resented being told to be creative, being told to have dynamics, being told to be in tune with the song or whatever. Like I naturally wanted to do that. And again, most kids, because of they're not as tainted with like overthinking and stuff, and they're more open, like they are going to be more in tune creatively. But there's this extra thing in basically people who are neurodivergent, or specifically on the autism spectrum, where that bit of like the mental part of being more like in tune with like big picture stuff, like also fuses with you understanding that your feelings and being in tune with your sensitivity like integrates with your mental ability. Like, I kind of have an interesting theory where I feel like people who are neurodivergent might have a harder time compartmentalizing things, but because of that they have a strength in, like I said, big picture thinking and connecting things, but they have a strength in holistically blending what they are doing. And I want to say that that is what they are born to do anyway. So for me, having that show up in piano, it was like right there again, being a kid will do that, but being a neurodivergent kid will have you like playing piano like without much practice, and people going like, what the heck? But like being a neurodivergent kid, I ended up like already putting my feelings into something, already mentally having the capacity to put a lot of these different like details of piano playing, because piano is kind of hard in that there are so many different elements. So I already took to putting that all together holistically and thinking about dynamics, and like it was really cool. But what my brain could not do was learn how to perfect specific things at once separately. I hated that. Allow yourself to hone your creativity, and not only just like definitely you can be like in arts and stuff, you can play music, you can write, do all the creative things, but honestly you can use creativity in basically everything you do. Creative problem solving, like think outside the box. You have the ability, if you haven't seen it already, I'm sure you have, but you have the ability to think differently than most neurotypical people do. I think that neither are better than the other. We need both neurotypical and neurodivergent thinking so that we have the balance of the big picture and the creative with the more consistent and detailed people. And if you do lean more neurotypical, I think these people are very used to like learning things the correct way and enacting it the correct way, which is important for consistency and stability. However, at school, in projects, in your relationships, especially at work, you may have the key to solving a problem. You may have the bird's eye view. You may have the different out of the box thinking that will actually benefit whoever you're working with. I know for me, again, I lean more big picture and stuff, and I kind of think more holistically, which may be something that a lot of other neurodivergent people relate to. But for me, I tend to see the big picture issues with any sort of group of people that I'm around, and I automatically think of it more holistically. So that's like, I'll think of the emotional piece involved. I'll think of like what isn't organized. I'll think of like basically what the big picture structure needs to be in order for something to operate correctly. And a lot of my biggest strengths right now are actually in pointing out personal developments things, which is why I have this podcast. But like, it allows me to think deeper. And honestly, I have been able to unlock sort of, again, like the holistic reason why things aren't working, and the holistic reasons why things could be fixed. And I found that to my benefit. And I found that this actually gives me a lot of a sort of not only creative, but sort of entrepreneurial ability. So I can really easily think of sort of entrepreneurial ideas. I can see my vision right away for, the businesses I want to create, like the bigger vision and purpose of like my channel, of the content I want to create. I can easily think of like different video ideas because I have a mind that that wants to associate things. So if you're creative, it really just means that you see a similarity between two, maybe sometimes unlike things, and you can turn it into something that you can express. Like being neurodivergent means that you create connections to things, you see patterns maybe more instantly and more easily than neurotypical people need to. So I want to highlight a key difference between neurotypical and neurodivergent people. So neurotypical people, I always think of as like they are able to, in their mind, open up a browser window and have one tab open, and they can choose to add on more tabs of, I guess, consciousness to be open. And for neurodivergent people, we tend to, when we open up the browser window of our mind, we tend to already have like 5 to 10 tabs open. And that's just because our mind is used to having those different pathways already. And so for us, it's like, it's a matter of how do we close down those tabs, or how do we focus on one tab at a time without going back and forth constantly, you know? And I feel like that just means that we are more set up, we are better equipped to thinking about different things at once, to being creative, to connecting the dots between things, and to seeing patterns, which is going to be so helpful in any sort of strategic planning, in, creating vision and goals, in just generally being creative. And this is helpful for any sort of avenue in life, whether it be your work, your relationships, whatever you're doing. Like, trust in the fact that, like, sure, you might have big, maybe even lofty ideas sometimes, but you are likely to have a very creative, visionary, even entrepreneurial mind that you get to work with and see as a strength. So a really interesting thing that I want to point out between like neurodivergent and neurotypical people is that because they are different ways of thinking, we tend to basically have different goals for how we want to grow into and like get wiser in our skills and our thinking and our learning. So basically, it's interesting because neurotypical people, again, have a strength in consistency and in details and in focusing on things in a more organized, sometimes linear way. And because of that, they're more likely to build up to big picture thinking and to build up to tying together patterns. But with neurodivergent people, again, we are born more likely to already be seeing patterns. Now, again, for me, I personally believe I see big picture patterns more easily. It might not be the same for all neurodivergent people, but either way, you're going to see those patterns a lot more easily than I think neurotypical people do from the get-go, because they are focused on sort of the linear focused details. But with neurodivergent people, it feels like we're already set up to think kind of holistically. And what's interesting is it seems like typically in humanity right now, we think that like kids, that people in general are supposed to learn little bits of things at a time until they become much more like wise and worldly to understand the big picture of life. Obviously, that is true. But with the neurodivergent minds, we already think holistically, meaning we factor in the emotions, the physical, like the mental. We think of a bunch of things at once from the get-go. And what we are trying to achieve is actually learning how to be consistent and focused like a neurotypical person. So it's very interesting. Two ends of the same coin. We need both types of people. Well, I cannot tell you how much in life people have told me that I'm such an ideas person, but basically inferred that it seems like I have no follow through. And I hate that because here's the thing. I do feel like I work hard, especially if it's for other people. I follow through for other people. But when it comes to my own ideas, not only have I had anxiety and a lot of reasons why I haven't acted on it, but when I let my ideas simmer for too long and I haven't acted on it, they become different ideas. they become ideas and ideas and different things and different offshoots. And then like I come up with all these other different things. Like I have always had somewhat of an entrepreneurial mind where like I have an idea for a brand and then I'm like, oh, I should make this type of content. Like, oh, I want to tackle these types of subjects. And then it just becomes like an ongoing idea dump. And I know if you're neurodivergent at all, you kind of understand this. If you're creative, you understand this. It's like it is an interesting, like, delicate balance between knowing like, okay, I am creative. I don't want to stifle my creativity. I don't want to basically restrict my creativity. However, I need to be somewhat more consistent. I need to act on this. Like, and I don't personally work as well when I do kind of throw spaghetti at the wall and be too messy. Some people might. That might just work for you. And if that does, then you have unlocked your, your flow, and that's great. But for me, I just know that I need a good mix of consistency and organization with my sort of overly like visionary idea making mind. So for me, if it helps when I have a ton of ideas to obviously write it down, to write down a plan, but obviously like it helps to kind of put due dates on things. Like I think at most, like when you have so many creative ideas, that's great. You can do that and go by feeling for like, like when you do it in the moment, be realistic with like, okay, I feel like I can't do so much at once. Maybe I have to segment this and do little bits of it at a time later. But whatever it is, write down how long it might take you and maybe overestimate how long it might take you. That is what helps me the most. That is the most I think I should be regulating myself at the moment in terms of my ideas so I don't overstep creativity. If I just create constant times throughout my week, throughout my day, if it's 30 minutes, if it's an hour or two, like if I just create time for things, then that is enough for me to be consistent enough to explore it. Also, I do have to give myself due dates and time limits for how long I can be in exploration mode. Again, I am a huge idea person, but the thing with me is, and I think with a lot of us creative types and neurodivergents, like we can overthink because we see patterns really easily. It doesn't take me long to find a pattern. It doesn't take me long to be creative. That's the easy part. It's if I let that simmer for too long, I might change the idea too much. I might like want to add on way too many things. So I have to actively thought stop. I have to actively tell myself like, okay, my goal is to make this thing one and done. Do not add to it. So that is usually the challenge. How can we at least make a goal to overthink and like ideate up until a point, and then we have to say, I have to take action on something by this time. Like, because I love that we're the idea people, but allow yourself to act on those ideas. Give yourself a goal date, maybe like a month from when the idea was made, whatever it is. Give yourself regular action items and action dates as well. Depending on what type of neurodivergent you are, I think we do all have like some element of hyperfocus to some extent. For me, again, I lean more autism and ADHD spectrum, but I know that when I am really in flow with something, when I do act on an idea, I might want to stick with it for like hours just because I want my full flow of consciousness to come out as I see it. Because again, if I take it in chunks and if I revisit it a second day, it might, like all my first ideas might just be completely wiped out and I might just do something else. Or alternatively, I might just be adding way too many more things. So it isn't focused on just the one big idea. And so for me, I've been finding that with hyper-focusing, it is important and healthy for me to still take breaks and again to thought stop and to allow myself to still focus on one idea without adding on too many more things. So what this looks like for me is, like, let's say typically I would hyper focus on a project for like 4 hours. And let me just say, physically, that makes me really stiff. Like, I always talk about how I have posture issues, and like, plus I have Ehlers-Danlos, so that makes my posture issues worse. And like, and I'll get really stiff. But when I'm hyper focused at my desk, when I'm doing something, even if I'm really passionate about it, it's as if my whole body like stiffens and it gets stuck and rigid so that my mind can be in hyper focus. And I feel like, as much as that is our strength as neurodivergent people, it still affects our body. And so, in order to avoid, honestly, the burnout and the physical, like, the health imbalances that come from extreme hyperfocus, it's important to take breaks. And that could be like, I know that we want to stay within our same stream of focus, but that could be like, getting up every hour or 2 hours for 15 minutes, like walking around, like writing down what your idea was, to revisit, so that when you come back to it, you're right back in that state. So that just means, a little bit of rest without totally killing, like, your talent in hyperfocus. Something that I never thought I could do, but I allow myself to stop masking. So if you are on the autism spectrum, or in general, if you're neurodivergent, you might have picked up a habit of what's called masking, which is basically pretending you're neurotypical, but to the point where it does disrupt your natural way of thinking and learning and doing things. Like for me, I have always put up this front that I am extremely organized, that I'm very well planned, that I'm very disciplined, and that I'm very focused. I can be all those things, but naturally I am still neurodivergent. And so me having to mask as neurotypical still made me feel a little bit unbalanced. And I still, like, I picked up a lot of good, consistent habits, and, you can still be consistent, you can still be focused and linear if you want to as a neurodivergent person. But there will be times when your mind does yearn to be more creative. And I think when you don't listen to that call to basically let loose, and honestly, when you're trying really hard to mask and look neurotypical, it almost feels like we're overdoing it to the point of burnout. So you are allowed to loosen up a lot more in how you're doing things. Like, I know for me, like, I was so rigid and thinking like, okay, I have to sit here at work all day and I have to plan things, and I cannot go off plan or else. And I think underlying under that was like me being afraid, maybe even subconsciously, that my neurodivergent nature would actually come out and I get completely, messy, disorganized, and out of the box and crazy. So we're allowed to take on the neurotypical traits, and which is really just like take on the consistency and organization that we want to, while still being relaxed. It's just a matter of, what does that balance look like for you? And you honestly get to pick and choose it. Like for me, I've been noticing that it's better for me to work only a couple of hours like at a time and take a break. Like for me, I've been noticing that like I will have so much energy if I'm just sitting at a desk all day, so I need to take a walk after 2 or 3 hours of sitting, and then like after 2 or more hours of working, I have to go do something active. Or I love red light therapy. I tend to do something like that to feel more like something therapeutic or something. Or, maybe it means for you have to take a creative break. Maybe you have to go play music. Maybe, you have to go cook. Maybe you have to go do something more tactile rather than something in your mind. Like, we get to create within our lives the balance and variety of basically how to use our body. Because whatever type of neurodivergent you are, whatever it is, I know that you don't want to just be doing one thing. And you want to allow your mind that ability to divert, to have more variety, to not just be in your head all day, to allow yourself also the emotions and the expression of doing something else. So we're allowed to create that within our daily lives even. Don't just wait for the weekends to be creative or to loosen up. You get to find ways to integrate that into your daily life. Also, in terms of masking, like I know even in personality and the way that I was communicating, and even in like my body language and in my gestures, like I remember thinking like I know that I'm kind of naturally fidgety. And part of that's Ehlers-Danlos and like being out of like not in the best postures. So some of that will definitely be more regulated for me, but like a lot of it is I do have some excess energy. And I always felt bad kind of sitting like in meetings or like sitting around at lunch with like a friend or something and like constantly moving. Like there's a way where that can be less nervous, but more like, you know what, I can just move around. I can just take a deep breath. I can stretch. And yeah, sometimes maybe I'll like shake my foot, tap my pen or whatever, and that is fine. Like you don't have to hide those little nervous habits that you may naturally have because your energy and your focus wants to be doing other things. And so like this came down to even like, you know, again, ways that I was communicating or like the personality I was trying to present. Like you get to be a little funny and oddball and like off the wall. And you know what? That's refreshing and that's fun. And if you honestly, whoever you are, whatever neurotype you are, if you lean into your authentic self and you're honest with it, it's always going to be the best for whoever you're around and for your own life and for yourself. So you don't have to try to be this buttoned up, overly professional, or like this perfect person on a date, or like this type of person that like would be friends with everyone. Like you don't have to wear a mask in general, in addition to like whatever masking you might be doing as a neurodivergent person. You get to be as excitable as you are. I know for me, like again, being a little bit different and having a lot of energy in some ways and a lot of kind of creative energy, like I would often be told like, why are you so excited? You're way too excited all the time. Like, and I never understood why people didn't want to see a little bit of passion or a little bit like, I don't have to look too cool all the time. But also if that's you and you alternatively don't want to be super social, if you don't want to be too talkative, if you kind of want to lie low, or if you want to do your own thing and you're confident doing that and not having to like, you know, put on a show all the time, which has also been me, like that is for you to do. And you don't have to pretend to be much more extroverted or to have much more energy. Like at your energy level, at who you are, you can be exactly who you are. Just be able to communicate when you need to. But either way, we get to be ourselves. We get to have the variety and variability of being ourselves and to acting on whatever our minds want to do without having to like think we have to put on a show or be a certain type of person. This is the truth for every neurotype, but specifically, I know us neurodivergents want to act quote unquote neurotypical, but we don't have to. We just have to be our healthiest, most balanced version of whoever we are. Let's talk about sensitivity. I know that I am a really hypersensitive person as well, which I think I attribute to being neurodivergent. Like I talked about this a little bit in my Signs You're Neurodivergent video. Go watch it. But I didn't have like all the same types of sensitivities to things as most people, but again, you're going to vary depending on your personality and your upbringing. But for me, like I tended to not be able to sit in silence in class when I was younger very well because I would be so distracted by whatever someone else was doing. When you are neurodivergent, again, you might see the deeper meaning, the deeper reason for things because you are more likely to see the patterns and the holistic reason behind why people get in arguments, why people are upset. Like, I think you might be a lot more in tuned and sensitive because you probably caught the patterns between the emotional reason why someone's doing something and then the arguments that are happening and like the problems that are happening as a result. Like these things you might not think are deep or intelligent in you. But actually, if you're a sensitive person at all, that means you are picking up on something deeper than most other people may pick up on. So we can own that. We can regulate that by, first of all, knowing like it is not a problem to be so sensitive. And second of all, when you find out when you are sensitive, you get to build boundaries around how much that affects you. But just having that awareness of your sensitivity, having that emotional intelligence that comes with holistic thinking and pattern recognition and sensitivity, like that is a strength. And honestly, that is, again, another one of those things that people think they're going to build up into and mature into as they get older. But if you're a kid, if you're in your 20s, even if you're in your 30s and you're already like, but I'm so hypersensitive, you might even be more emotionally mature than most people. And you can turn that into healthy emotional maturity, healthy balance, and self-awareness that still many other people may lack because they were not taught that that was good. But yeah, I am 35. I am finally like not judging myself for all the things that make me different. Like honestly, if I list all the different things I have, it at its core, it came from developmental and health issues. Like I am more creative and out the box than most people. Like I move differently. Like I tend to isolate myself a little bit more. Like I'm more emotional, but I can hone my emotions. All of these things. Why am I so different? You know, I'm an Aquarius, and that makes sense for me and my personality as well. So I just feel like I have now started to realize like all these differences are also not as different as I think. There's so many people out there who maybe just don't speak on it or don't realize that they are neurodivergent or whatever. But all of these things that have made me at 35 years old, I am happy that I have all these things. And also, to be honest, it makes you stand out from the crowd. Like you will be able to create different things. You'll be able to be that different, innovative, out of the box thinker in a lot of situations. Like even in personal relationships, like you will be that different person. So it is always going to be to your benefit, honestly, that you think different, that you are divergent. And yeah, so allow yourself to own it, to love it, have fun with it. And if you do run into people that have issues with it, just know that like they obviously don't realize that you need both sides of the spectrum, or I guess both sides of neuro to work in order for the world to be in balance. You need the creatives, you need the divergents, you need the people who are more linear or consistent. Like, and honestly, you need as a person to have traits of both. So embrace it. Okay, well, until next time, peace and love. Bye-bye.